the magical soft plastic worm. And we're going to be doing some winter worm fishing for pickerels in this video. And this is shot over the course of 3 outings I had. So I took a few of the clips and put them together, fishing with the deadly soft plastic worm. I'm using the Culprit 7-inch and the Mr. Twister Phenom 7-inch worm in a variety of colors, rigged the same, fished the same, and with the same results. Just excellent fishing over the course of 3 days. So I took some clips out and I decided to talk about basically how I rig and fish these worms in the winter time for pickerel. And I'm going to talk about things I look for, from the weather I like to fish to how I work the worm, how I rig the worm, times, and all that stuff. So we're going to be cold water fishing for pickerel in this video, and we're going to get right to it and start talking about how we're going to fish for these pickerel. I'm going to briefly talk about the time I like to fish for pickerel in the winter, and that's going to be you're warmer, probably less windy. Sunny is good because it's going to keep you warm. Cloudy is going to be good too. You might not be as warm, but more importantly, I'm going to look for those days where I have an ice out on the water. I found if you have ice on the water, the more ice on the water, even in open spots, fishing is going to be slower. I can't recall any memorable days where the water had some sort of crust of ice around the edges. You may get a fish or two, I've had, but those days are going to be a slow day. And these are the days I look for. Your sunnier, calmer days after the ice is out, and when that lake clears up after an ice, the fishing can be excellent. I like this clip here. When you're fishing a soft plastic worm, be it culprit or whatever worm you like for pickerel, I like to keep things slow, and I'm going to let that worm sink, and I'm setting up my line here. I'm going to raise my rod, and you can see I'm letting that worm drop, and you can see I'm just giving it little twitches with the rod tip, and it's giving that worm a real nice undulating action under the water. And as I slowly raise my rod tip, I'm working that worm through the column in front of that brush over there. And so I'm working it through, up and down, across, and that worm's just sitting there undulating. That's how I work the worm. I'm going to show you briefly how I rig the worm, and well, it's already on my line. But basically you just thread that worm up the hook, and I'm using a offset number 40 Gamakatsu hook, and I just put my hook through so that worm is straight, and I'll puncture that hook through the other side, and I'll lay it out flat, and it should be there already, but here we go. Now I'm going to talk the speed that I work the worm. You can see it's quite slow. I don't think you can work that worm too slow. Just the slowest bit of twitches you put on your rod tip, just a better that worm's going to work. Keep in mind you can also work that worm faster. Those short bursts too. Nothing wrong with changing your pace. I'm not saying work your worm slow all the time, but dominantly I want to be working my worm slow. I definitely will try fast, undulating, twitching motions as I'm working that worm. But for the most part, I'm thinking slow, and you can't work that worm too slow. But change your retrieve, but that's just the dominant retrieve I use when working the soft plastic worm, be it culprit, Mr. Twister, for pickerel. For the most part, I'm thinking slow, and you can't work that worm too slow. And you can see I'm just giving it little twitches with the rod tip, and it's giving that worm a real nice undulating action under the water. And I'm using a offset number 40 Gamakatsu hook, and I'm going to give that worm twitches. And when I raise that rod tip, I'm raising the elevation of my worm. The most important thing you can think about is how your worm is suspended. Okay, here's another clip of me working the rod tip. You can see it's very slow retrieve, and my rod's almost parallel to the water when I start. So I'm getting that worm down deep, and I'm going to give that worm twitches. And when I raise that rod tip, I'm raising the elevation of my worm, and it's going to drop back down. And that's how I'm working the worm. And I'm going to be using the rest of the video, these here Mr. Twister Phenom worms, and I'm going to rig them up. This is a straight bend hook, and I put that on an angle with a straight bend. If you don't have a bend, a straight hook, I just put it on an angle and make sure my hook is sharp. I'm going to talk about now about what matters most when worm fish, soft plastic worm fishing for pickerel in wintertime. I think the most important thing you can think about is how your worm is suspended. I am using very little weight. I might not even be using any weight sometimes. So I'm using no more than 1/16 of an ounce. If not, I'm using no weight. I'm letting that worm just kind of hang in there and sit and just kind of undulate it with the action of my rod. So suspension, how you suspend that worm, is number one. Secondary is size. Real briefly, I'm working with 7-inch worms. If the bite was slow, I might go to a smaller worm. If I had any and the bite was fast, could even go to a bigger worm. That's secondary. And then of course third, and this is what makes it all, this is the most fun part, is the color of your worm. I'm thinking brighter colors, maybe sunnier days, and darker colors, cloudy days of course. But stained water, darker worm. The color of your worm is tertiary to everything else. If you find that you're doing everything and nothing is working, try using a contrasting color as per what you were using before. And those are the three things that matter most when worm fishing for pickerel in wintertime. One thing for sure is I'm not looking for the long cast. 90% of my fishing is the short cast when I'm fishing for pickerel. Again, 4/0 hook, Texas rig style, little 1/16 ounce to no weight is how I'm rigging up my worm. And I'm going to finish off here using a bright pink flashy worm for these here pickerels. And I'm just going to sum up everything briefly. Worm fishing, soft plastic worm fishing for pickerel in wintertime is just a deadly way to fish. It's all about how you suspend your worm. Number one, when working the worm in wintertime, you want hang time. The longer you hang that worm, the better it's going to be. And you want to slowly cover that water column. I think I showed that with the use of my rod tip. Lightest weight possible to get that action. I like the 4/0 round bend worm hook the best, offset top. And the best time to fish is going to be when that lake is completely melted out. I found if you have skim ice around the sides, edges, the fishing, I don't have any memorable days in those conditions. So that's going to be what you're going to be looking for. Of course, your warmer days are going to be your best days out there on the water just because they're going to be more comfortable. And of course, windless, warm days are going to be the days to fish. Cloudy days are going to be phenomenal too if the temperature is comfortable. And but those are just some of the things I look for when winter fishing with the worm, soft plastic worm for pickerel. But anyway, I'm going to be getting out of here, and these worms just work great. They get all mangled up, and you're going to get a bunch of fish on whatever worms you use. I just like these ones here, but they all work. All these soft plastic worms work. But thanks for watching. Have a good afternoon, night, day, evening, and I hope you enjoyed watching the video.